The gunshot echoed through the mountain pass, and Clara Whitmore knew she was running out of time. Blood soaked through the sleeve of her dress where the bullet had grazed her arm, and her horse had thrown a shoe 2 miles back, forcing her to abandon the animal and continue on foot through the unforgiving Arizona Territory wilderness. It was September of 1876, and the sun beat down mercilessly as she stumbled into the tiny settlement of Eager, population maybe 200 souls if you counted generously. The first building she saw was a small white church with a crooked steeple, and without thinking, she pushed through the wooden doors and collapsed onto the nearest pew. The church was blessedly cool and empty, dust motes dancing in the afternoon light that streamed through the simple glass windows. Clara pressed her hand against her wounded arm and began to pray, not the formal prayers her mother had taught her back in Philadelphia, but desperate, raw pleas for protection, for safety, for a way out of the nightmare her life had become in the past 3 months. She did not hear the door open behind her. She did not hear the heavy footsteps of boots on the wooden floor, but she felt the presence of someone large settling onto the pew beside her, and terror seized her heart. Her eyes flew open, and she turned to see the biggest man she had ever laid eyes on. He had to be well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to fill the entire pew. His arms were thick with muscle, visible even beneath the worn buckskin shirt he wore. His hair was dark brown and fell past his shoulders, tied back loosely with a leather cord. A thick beard covered the lower half of his face, but his eyes were what caught her attention. They were a striking blue-gray, like storm clouds over the mountains, and they were closed as he sat with his head bowed and his hands folded in prayer. Clara held her breath, trying to decide whether to run or stay frozen. But the man seemed to pay her no mind whatsoever. He simply sat there, lips moving silently, lost in his own communion with the divine. After a long moment, Clara realized he had not come for her at all. He was simply here to pray. Her racing heart began to slow, and she turned her attention back to her own prayers, though she kept glancing at him from the corner of her eye. They sat like that for nearly half an hour before the man finally opened his eyes, crossed himself, and stood. He glanced at her once, gave a small nod, and walked out of the church without a word. Clara waited another 10 minutes before she dared to leave. When she emerged, the street was quiet, and she saw no sign of the mountain man or anyone else who might be looking for her. She found a small boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Henderson, and paid for a week's lodging with the last of her money, giving a false name and story about heading west to meet her husband. That night, as she lay in the narrow bed and listened to the sounds of the frontier town settling into darkness, she thought about the man in the church. There had been something almost otherworldly about him, something peaceful despite his intimidating size and wild appearance. She wondered who he was and why he had been there. The next Sunday, driven by a need for peace and perhaps hoping to understand the safety she had felt in that moment, Clara returned to the church for the actual service. The building was fuller this time, with perhaps 30 people scattered among the pews. The preacher was a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles who spoke about forgiveness and new beginnings. Clara tried to focus on his words, but her attention kept drifting to the door, wondering if the mountain man would appear. He did not come during the service. But after everyone else had filed out, offering polite nods and curious glances at the new woman in town, Clara remained in her pew. She told herself she was simply enjoying the quiet, but truthfully, she was waiting. 20 minutes after the last parishioner had departed, the door opened, and he walked in. The same massive frame, the same long dark hair, the same worn buckskin clothing that marked him as someone who spent most of his time in the wilderness rather than in town. He walked to the same pew as before, sat down beside her though there were dozens of empty seats, and bowed his head in prayer. Clara's heart pounded, but not from fear this time. There was something about his presence that made her feel safer than she had felt in months. She closed her own eyes and prayed, and for the first time since her troubles began, she felt a small spark of hope. This pattern continued for 3 more Sundays. Clara would attend the morning service, then remain after everyone left. The mountain man would arrive, sit beside her, and pray in silence. They never spoke. They never even looked at each other directly. But each week, Clara felt the invisible bond between them growing stronger. It was on the 5th Sunday that everything changed. Clara had just settled into the pew after the service when she heard horses outside and raised voices. Her blood turned to ice. She recognized one of those voices. Frank Morrison and his men had found her. The church door burst open, and 3 men strode in. Frank was in the lead, a handsome man in his 40s with cold eyes and an expensive suit that looked out of place in the rough frontier town. He smiled when he saw her, but there was no warmth in it. "There you are, Catherine," he said, using the false name she had given when she agreed to work as a governess for his children back in Silver City, New Mexico. That had been before she discovered what kind of man he really was, before she witnessed him murder his business partner in cold blood, before she became the one loose end he needed to tie up. "You have led me on quite a chase." "Stay away from me," Clara said, standing and backing toward the altar. "I will tell everyone what you did, what you are." "No one will believe the word of a hysterical woman over mine," Frank said, advancing slowly. His 2 men fanned out to block the other exit. "You are going to come with me quietly, and we are going to have a little accident on the road back to Silver City. Very tragic, but these things happen." The lady said, "Stay away." The voice came from the doorway, deep and rough like distant thunder. All eyes turned to see the mountain man standing there, and suddenly the church seemed much smaller. He had to duck slightly to clear the door frame, and when he straightened to his full height, even Frank Morrison took an involuntary step backward. "This does not concern you, friend," Frank said, though his voice had lost some of its confidence. "This woman is my employee and she has stolen from me. I am simply recovering my property." "She is not property," the mountain man said, walking forward. Each step seemed to shake the floorboards. "And she is staying here. You know who I am." Frank's face flushed with anger. "I own half of Silver City. I have connections all the way to Santa Fe. You are making a very serious mistake." The mountain man stopped a few feet away from Frank. Up close, the difference in their sizes was almost comical. Frank was of average height and build, while the mountain man towered over him like a grizzly bear next to a coyote. "My name is Caleb Whitestone," the mountain man said. "I trap in the White Mountains most of the year. I do not care about your connections or your money. The lady stays here." Frank's hand moved toward the pistol at his hip, but he never cleared leather. Caleb's hand shot out with surprising speed for such a large man, catching Frank's wrist in a grip that made the businessman cry out in pain. The gun clattered to the floor. "You and your men are going to leave now," Caleb said quietly. "You are going to ride out of Eager and you are not going to come back. If you do, we are going to have a different kind of conversation and you will not enjoy it." "You cannot protect her forever," Frank hissed, cradling his wrist. "I will come back with the law. I will bring 20 men. You have made an enemy today." Caleb released him and stepped back. "Then I have made an enemy, but today you are leaving." For a moment, it seemed Frank might argue further, but something in Caleb's eyes must have convinced him that discretion was the better part of valor. He jerked his head at his men and they backed toward the door. "This is not over, Catherine," Frank said to Clara. "Not by a long shot." Then they were gone, and the church was silent except for Clara's ragged breathing. She realized she was shaking and sat down hard on the pew. Caleb walked over and carefully picked up Frank's discarded pistol, tucking it into his belt. "Thank you," Clara whispered. "You saved my life." Caleb looked at her for a long moment, and she saw compassion in those storm cloud eyes. "Are you hurt?" Clara shook her head, then changed her mind and nodded toward her arm. "He shot me a few weeks ago when I ran. It is mostly healed now. May I see?" Clara hesitated, then rolled up her sleeve. The wound had closed but left an angry red scar. Caleb examined it with surprising gentleness for such large hands. "You did well cleaning it," he said. "No infection. You are lucky." "I do not feel very lucky," Clara said, and suddenly tears were streaming down her face. "I am sorry. I did not mean to drag you into this. I did not mean to drag anyone into this." "What is your real name?" Caleb asked softly. Clara Dempsey. "I am from Philadelphia originally. I came west to work as a governess, and I thought Mr. Morrison was a respectable businessman. But I saw him kill his partner. I heard them arguing in his study about money that had gone missing. I heard the gunshot. When I ran in, his partner was dead on the floor, and Frank was standing there with a smoking gun." The words poured out of her in a rush. "He saw me. He told me I would have to disappear too, that no one would believe me anyway. I ran that night and took a horse. I have been running ever since." Caleb listened without interrupting. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "He will come back. Men like that always do. I know. I should leave. I should go farther west, maybe to California. I should not stay here and put this town at risk." "Or you could stay and let me help you," Caleb said. Clara looked up at him in surprise. "Why would you do that? You do not even know me." "I have been watching you these past weeks," Caleb said. "Every Sunday you come here to pray. I see the fear in you, but I also see strength. I see someone who has been through hell but still has faith. That is worth protecting." "But why do you come here after everyone else leaves?" Clara asked. "Why do you pray alone?" Caleb's expression grew distant. "I lost my wife and son 3 years ago, cholera. After they died, I could not stand to be around people. I went up into the mountains and stayed there. But I missed church. I missed praying. So I started coming on Sundays after everyone else had gone, when I could be alone with God." He paused. "Until I found you here that first day, and somehow praying beside you felt right. Like maybe I was not as alone as I thought." Clara's heart ached for him. "I am so sorry for your loss." "And I am sorry for yours," Caleb said. "Maybe we are both running from something, but maybe we do not have to run anymore." In that moment, something shifted between them. The silent understanding that had grown over their shared Sundays suddenly blossomed into something deeper, something that felt like the first stirrings of connection, of hope, of possibility. "What do we do about Frank Morrison?" Clara asked. "First, we talk to the sheriff. Tell him the truth. Then we prepare, in case Morrison comes back with those 20 men he threatened." "Will the sheriff believe me?" "Sheriff Tom Jennings is a good man. He will listen, and I will stand with you." Clara felt tears prick her eyes again, but this time they were not tears of fear or despair. They were tears of gratitude. "Why are you being so kind to me?" Caleb smiled, the first smile she had seen from him, and it transformed his rugged face. "Because God sent me to this church at the right time, and I have learned not to question when God puts someone in your path." They left the church together, and Caleb walked Clara to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Jennings was a weathered man in his 50s with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. He listened to Clara's story without interrupting, occasionally taking notes in a battered ledger. "Frank Morrison," he said when she finished. "I have heard of him. Rich man from Silver City. has his fingers in a lot of pies, not all of them legal from what I understand, but he has never been caught at anything. Because he kills anyone who might testify against him, Clara said. His partner's body is probably buried somewhere in the desert where no one will ever find it. Problem is, without a body we have no proof, Jennings said. It is your word against his. And like it or not, Miss Dempsey, his word carries a lot more weight than yours. So I should just let him kill me? Clara's voice rose with frustration. No, you should stay in town where we can watch out for you, and if Morrison comes back making threats, we will deal with him. But unless we can prove he committed murder, I cannot arrest him. Caleb, who had been standing quietly by the door, spoke up. What if someone witnessed the partner's murder? What if there was another person who saw what Morrison did? Jennings looked at him sharply. Is there? I do not know yet, but I know people in Silver City. Trappers and traders who hear things. Let me ask around. Maybe we can find someone else who knows Morrison's secrets. That could be dangerous, Jennings warned. Morrison sounds like a man who does not like people poking into his business. I can handle myself, Caleb said simply. After leaving the sheriff's office, Caleb insisted on walking Clara back to the boarding house. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and the temperature was finally dropping from the day's heat. You do not have to do this, Clara said as they walked. You do not have to risk yourself for me. I know, Caleb said, but I want to. For the first time in 3 years, I feel like I have a purpose beyond just surviving. Do you understand? Clara did understand. She had felt so alone for so long, and now suddenly she had this powerful, kind man standing beside her. It felt almost too good to be true. When will you leave for Silver City? She asked. Tomorrow morning, early. I should be back in a week, maybe less. And if Frank comes back while you are gone, Sheriff Jennings will watch over you, and I am going to ask a favor from some friends. Caleb led her down a side street to a modest house with a well-tended garden. He knocked on the door, and a moment later it opened to reveal a Native American woman in her 30s with kind eyes and graying hair. Caleb, she said with genuine warmth, it has been too long. Sarah, I need your help. Caleb quickly explained the situation, and Sarah's expression grew serious. Bring her in, Sarah said. She can stay with me while you are gone. My husband and sons will keep watch. I cannot impose, Clara protested, but Sarah was already ushering her inside. Nonsense. Any friend of Caleb's is welcome here. Besides, we women need to stick together. Sarah looked at Caleb. You be careful in Silver City. Men like this Morrison are dangerous. I will, Caleb promised. He turned to Clara. I will be back soon. Stay here, stay safe. Clara wanted to say so much more. She wanted to tell him how grateful she was, how amazed she was at his kindness, how terrified she was of him leaving. But all she managed was, come back safe. I will, Caleb said, and then he was gone into the gathering darkness. Sarah's house turned out to be a warm, welcoming place. Her husband, Thomas, was a blacksmith with Apache heritage who spoke little, but had a reassuring presence. Their 3 sons, ranging in age from 15 to 22, were all strong young men who reminded Clara a bit of Caleb in their quiet competence. Sarah explained that she and Caleb had been friends for years, that he had helped her family through several hard winters by sharing his meat and furs. He is a good man, Sarah said that night as they sat by the fire and she taught Clara how to mend buckskin. He was devastated when he lost Martha and little James. We all thought he might not come back from that grief. He disappeared into the mountains for nearly a year. When he finally came back to town, he was different, harder, more closed off, but still kind in his way. He said he comes to church on Sundays, Clara said. Every Sunday for the past 2 years, regular as clockwork, but always after everyone else has left. I think being around people reminds him too much of what he lost." "How did they die?" Clara asked softly. "Cholera outbreak swept through town. Martha got sick first, then little James. Caleb nursed them both for days, barely sleeping, but there was nothing anyone could do. They died within hours of each other." Sarah's eyes were distant with the memory. "Caleb dug their graves himself, up on the hill behind the church. He carved their headstones from oak. Then he rode into the mountains and did not come back for 11 months. Clara's heart ached for him. "And now he is risking himself for me, a stranger." "Maybe he needs to feel useful again," Sarah said. "Maybe he needs to save someone since he could not save them. Or maybe," she added with a knowing look, "he sees something special in you." Clara felt her cheeks warm. "We have barely spoken until today. Sometimes words are not necessary. Thomas and I barely spoke for the first 6 months we knew each other, but I knew, and he knew, some things you just feel." Sarah smiled. "Get some rest. You have been carrying fear for a long time. Let it go for tonight. You are safe here." That night, Clara slept better than she had in months. The next morning, she woke to the smell of coffee and fry bread. Sarah put her to work helping with various tasks around the house, and Clara was grateful for the distraction. The days passed slowly, each one feeling longer than the last as she waited for news of Caleb. Frank Morrison did not return during that week, and Clara began to hope that perhaps Caleb's threat had been enough to scare him off. But Sarah and Thomas did not let their guard down, and there was always at least one of the sons nearby, watching the street. It was 8 days after Caleb had left that he finally returned. Clara was helping Sarah hang laundry when she heard the horse approaching. She turned to see Caleb riding up on a large bay gelding, and relief flooded through her so powerfully that her knees nearly buckled. He looked tired and dusty from the road, but his eyes lit up when he saw her. He dismounted and walked over, and Clara had to resist the urge to throw her arms around him. "You came back," she said. "I said I would," Caleb replied, "and I found something. We need to talk to Sheriff Jennings." At the sheriff's office, Caleb produced a worn leather journal. This belonged to Morrison's partner, a man named Henry Walsh. I tracked down Walsh's brother in Silver City. He had gone through Henry's belongings after he disappeared and found this journal. It details all of Morrison's illegal activities, including bribes, extortion, and planned murders. And it specifically mentions that Henry was afraid Morrison was going to kill him. Sheriff Jennings flipped through the journal, his expression growing grimmer with each page. "This is detailed. Names, dates, amounts. If even half of this is true, Morrison should hang." "Will it be enough to arrest him?" Clara asked. "It will be enough to bring charges. I will send a telegram to the federal marshal in Santa Fe. This is bigger than just one murder now." Jennings looked at Clara. "You are going to need to testify about what you saw. Are you prepared for that?" Clara squared her shoulders. "I am. It might take weeks or even months before this goes to trial. Morrison is going to lawyer up and it will get ugly." "I can wait," Clara said, "as long as it means he faces justice." Over the next few weeks, Clara settled into a rhythm in Eager. She continued staying with Sarah and her family, helping around the house and the blacksmith shop. Sheriff Jennings received word from the federal marshal that an investigation into Frank Morrison had been opened, and Morrison himself was being watched in Silver City to ensure he did not flee. And every Sunday, Clara went to the church. She attended the morning service, then stayed after everyone else had left. And every Sunday, Caleb came and sat beside her, and they prayed together in comfortable silence. Except the silence began to be broken by small conversations. A comment about the weather, a question about how the week had gone. Gradually, steadily, they began to know each other. Clara learned that Caleb had been born in Missouri but had come west as a young man seeking adventure. He had met Martha at a trading post, and they had married within 3 months. He had supported them through trapping and hunting, and they had been happy. Little James had been 4 years old when he died, a bright, curious boy who loved to follow his father around. "I see him sometimes in my dreams," Caleb said one Sunday afternoon as they sat in the church. "He is playing in a meadow and Martha is there watching him. They look happy, at peace. It helps." "My parents died when I was 16, Clara shared. "Fever took them both. I had no other family, so I went to work as a governess. I have been on my own ever since. Sometimes I forget what it feels like to have someone to rely on." "You have people now," Caleb said, and when his hand brushed against hers on the pew between them, Clara did not pull away. His hand was large and rough from hard work, but his touch was gentle. After a moment, his fingers intertwined with hers and they sat like that for a long time, just holding hands and feeling less alone. The next Sunday, Caleb brought her a gift, a small carved wooden bird. "I made it this week," he said, almost shyly. "I thought you might like it." Clara turned the carving over in her hands, marveling at the detail. Every feather was perfectly rendered and the bird's expression was somehow both realistic and full of life. "It is beautiful. You are very talented." "Martha used to say I had good hands," Caleb said. "I carved toys for James. After they died, I could not bring myself to do it anymore. But this week, I wanted to make something for you." Clara felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Thank you, I will treasure it." That afternoon, they talked for hours, about everything and nothing. Clara told him about Philadelphia, about the books she loved to read, about her dreams of someday having a home of her own, a place where she could put down roots. Caleb told her about the mountains, about the beauty of the wilderness, about the peace he found in the solitude. "But I have been thinking," Caleb said. "Maybe too much solitude is not good for a person. Maybe we need connection, need people, need something to live for beyond just ourselves." "What are you saying?" Clara asked, her heart beating faster. "I am saying that these past weeks, since I met you, I have felt more alive than I have in 3 years. I am saying that I think about you constantly. I worry about you when we are apart. I count the days until Sunday when I can see you again." He turned to face her fully. "I am saying that I am falling in love with you, Clara Dempsey, and I know it is fast, and I know we have only really known each other for a short time, but my heart knows what it knows." Clara felt tears streaming down her face. "I am falling in love with you too. I think I have been since that first day when you sat beside me and prayed. You made me feel safe when I had forgotten what safety felt like." Caleb reached out and gently wiped away her tears. "When this business with Morrison is finished, when you are safe and free, I want to court you properly. I want to build you a house. I want to give you that home you have been dreaming of." "I would like that very much," Clara whispered. And then, there in the quiet church with the afternoon sun streaming through the windows, Caleb leaned in and kissed her. It was gentle and sweet and full of promise, and Clara felt like her heart might burst from happiness. The world outside continued to turn. Word came that Frank Morrison had been arrested and was awaiting trial. The federal marshal himself traveled to Eager to take Clara's statement, and he assured her that, with the evidence they had, Morrison would almost certainly be convicted. But Morrison was not going quietly. He hired expensive lawyers from back east, and they filed motion after motion, trying to get the case dismissed. The trial date kept getting pushed back. Weeks turned into months. Summer faded to fall, and fall began its slide toward winter. Through it all, Caleb was there. He courted Clara in the old-fashioned way, with Sarah and Thomas acting as chaperones. He took her on picnics in the hills surrounding Eager. He showed her his favorite places in the wilderness, though they never went too far from town. He brought her little gifts: a pretty stone, a hawk feather, wildflowers pressed between pages of the Bible, and every Sunday they met in the church and prayed together. But now, after their prayers, they would sit close and talk, and Caleb would hold her hand, and sometimes they would kiss, soft and gentle, full of growing love. Clara had never been happier. She found work helping Sarah with her sewing business, and she began to build a life in Eager. She made friends among the townspeople. She became a regular at the Sunday morning service as well as the afternoon prayers with Caleb. She felt herself putting down the roots she had always dreamed of, but there was still the shadow of Frank Morrison hanging over everything. As long as the trial was pending, as long as he was not convicted, Clara could not fully relax. The trial was finally scheduled for February of 1877, to be held in Santa Fe. Clara would have to travel there to testify, and Caleb insisted on accompanying her. Sheriff Jennings also made the journey, along with Henry Walsh's brother, who would be presenting the journal as evidence. Santa Fe was unlike anything Clara had seen in the Arizona Territory. It was a real city, with adobe buildings and bustling streets, and a sense of history that seemed to seep from every corner. The courthouse was an imposing structure, and when Clara walked in on the first day of the trial, she felt her courage falter. But Caleb was beside her, solid and strong, and when she looked at him, he gave her an encouraging nod. "You can do this," he said quietly. "Just tell the truth." The trial lasted 3 days. Frank Morrison sat at the defense table looking calm and confident, flanked by his lawyers. But when Clara took the stand and told her story, looking him straight in the eye, she saw a flicker of fear cross his face. The defense lawyers tried to discredit her, suggesting she was a scorned woman making up stories, but Clara held firm. She described exactly what she had seen and heard. She answered every question clearly and precisely. When Henry Walsh's journal was entered into evidence, Morrison's lawyers objected strenuously, but the judge allowed it. The journal was damning, laying out Morrison's crimes in meticulous detail. On the 3rd day, the jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all counts, including murder. Frank Morrison was sentenced to hang. Clara felt no joy in it, only relief. As they left the courthouse, she leaned against Caleb, suddenly exhausted. "It is over," she said. "It is finally over." "Yes," Caleb said, wrapping his arm around her. "It is over. Now your life can really begin." They returned to Eager in late February. The weather was cold and there was snow in the mountains. But inside the church that first Sunday back, it was warm and welcoming. After the morning service, Clara and Caleb remained behind as usual, but this time, instead of just praying, Caleb had something to say. "I have been building something," he said. "I want to show you." He led her out of the church and to the edge of town, where a small house stood. It was new, built from fresh-cut lumber and river stone with a wide front porch and real glass windows. Smoke curled from the chimney. "You built this?" Clara asked in wonder. "I have been working on it for months, every day that I was not with you. I wanted it to be perfect." Caleb took both her hands in his. "Clara Dempsey, I love you with everything I am. I know we have only known each other for 6 months, but I know my heart. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" Clara's answer was immediate. "Yes. Yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married in the church in March of 1877, with most of the town in attendance. Sarah stood up as Clara's matron of honor, and Thomas stood with Caleb. Sheriff Jennings gave Clara away, and the preacher spoke about love and faith and new beginnings. When Caleb kissed his bride, there was not a dry eye in the house. This mountain man who had isolated himself in grief had found love again. And this woman who had been running and afraid had found safety and home. Their first year of marriage was everything Clara had dreamed of and more. The house Caleb had built was cozy and comfortable, with a bedroom and a kitchen and a main room with a large fireplace. Caleb had even built shelves for Clara's few books and had promised to get her more whenever a trader came through. They fell into an easy rhythm. Caleb would go out trapping in the mountains for a few days at a time, and Clara would stay home, tending to the house and working on her sewing. When he returned, they would spend long evenings by the fire, talking and laughing and simply enjoying each other's company. And every Sunday, without fail, they went to church together. They attended the morning service, where they sat holding hands in their usual pew. And then they stayed after, just the two of them, praying together in the quiet sanctuary. It was their tradition, the foundation of their love story, and they never wavered from it. In the summer of 1877, Clara discovered she was pregnant. She told Caleb one Sunday afternoon in the church, the place that had brought them together. He wept with joy and held her close, thanking God for this blessing. Their son was born in March of 1878, almost exactly a year after their wedding. They named him James, after Caleb's first son, and also Thomas, after their good friend who had stood by them. Little James Thomas Whitestone was a healthy baby with his father's storm cloud eyes and his mother's dark hair. Caleb was a devoted father, gentle and patient with his son. Clara would often watch them together, the massive mountain man cradling the tiny baby with such tenderness, and her heart would overflow with love. "I never thought I would have this again," Caleb told her one night as they lay in bed with baby James sleeping in his cradle nearby. "A family. A home. Love. I thought that part of my life was over." "God had other plans," Clara said, snuggling close to her husband. "He brought me to that church at exactly the right moment. He put you in my path, and I will be grateful for that every day for the rest of my life." As James grew, they added to their family. A daughter, Martha Sarah, came in 1880, named after Caleb's first wife and their dear friend Sarah. Then another son, Henry Michael, in 1882, named after the brave man whose journal had helped bring Frank Morrison to justice, and Michael for the Archangel. Their house grew too, with Caleb adding rooms as needed. The shelves filled with books, the walls with photographs and mementos. The front porch became a gathering place where neighbors would stop by for conversation and fresh water on hot days. Caleb never went back to spending months alone in the mountains. He would still trap and hunt, but never for more than a week at a time, and he always came home eager to be with his family. The mountains had been his refuge in grief, but his family was his joy. Clara became a pillar of the community in Eager. She taught reading to the children in town and helped start a small lending library. She organized church socials and helped new families get established. She had found her place, and she had found her purpose. But no matter how busy life got, no matter how many demands were placed on their time, they always kept their Sunday tradition. Every single Sunday, they attended the morning service. And then, leaving the children with Sarah and Thomas, they would stay behind in the quiet church and pray together. They would thank God for bringing them together. They would pray for their children and their friends. They would pray for the town and for each other. And they would simply sit in silence, hands clasped, feeling the peace and love that had first bloomed between them in this sacred space. The years passed gently. Their children grew strong and healthy. James took after his father, becoming tall and strong with a love of the wilderness. Martha was bright and curious, always reading and asking questions. Henry was the gentle soul, with a gift for carving wood just like his father. In 1885, Caleb took Clara on a trip to visit the mountain valleys where he used to trap. They left the children with Sarah and Thomas and spent 2 weeks in the high country, just the two of them. Caleb showed her the places he had loved, the meadows and streams and caves where he had sheltered during storms. "I was so lost when I came here," he said one evening as they sat by their campfire, looking up at the stars. "After Martha and James died, I thought my life was over. I thought I would just exist in these mountains until I died too. I did not care about anything, did not want anything." "What changed?" Clara asked, though she thought she knew. "I started going to church again, started praying. And slowly, very slowly, I felt God telling me that my story was not over, that there was still a purpose for me. I did not know what it was, but I trusted. And then I found you." Clara leaned her head on his shoulder. "I was lost too, running, afraid, alone. And then this enormous mountain man sat down beside me and prayed, and somehow I knew everything would be all right." "We saved each other," Caleb said simply. "Yes," Clara agreed. "We did." They returned home to their children and their life, but that trip became an annual tradition. Every summer, they would take 2 weeks to go back to the mountains, just the two of them, to remember where they had come from and to celebrate where they were going. In 1890, their oldest son James announced he was getting married. His bride was a sweet girl named Elizabeth from a neighboring town. The wedding was held in the same church where Caleb and Clara had met, and as Clara watched her son exchange vows, she thought about the journey that had brought them all to this moment. She looked over at Caleb, standing tall beside her, his hair now streaked with gray but his eyes still the same storm cloud blue that had captured her heart. He caught her looking and smiled, reaching over to take her hand. Even after 13 years of marriage, his touch still made her heart flutter. They had grandchildren in time, 3 from James and Elizabeth, 2 from Martha and her husband, and eventually 4 from Henry and his wife. The little house at the edge of Eager that Caleb had built with such care became the center of a large, loving family. Sunday dinners became a tradition, with all the children and grandchildren gathering after church. The house would be full of noise and laughter and love. But no matter how busy things got, Caleb and Clara always took their time after the morning service to stay behind and pray together, just the two of them. "You remember the first time I saw you?" Caleb asked one Sunday in 1895. They were both in their 50s now, their hair gray and their faces lined with the marks of a life well lived. "Of course," Clara said. "I was terrified. I thought Frank's men had found me, and then I looked up and saw this huge mountain man sitting beside me." "I remember thinking how brave you were," Caleb said. "Sitting there injured and afraid but still praying, still having faith. I did not even know your name, but I felt drawn to you." "I felt it too," Clara said. "That very first day, even though we did not speak, I felt connected to you. Like God was telling me I was exactly where I needed to be." "He was," Caleb said, "because you were. We both were." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the quiet of the empty church, feeling the weight of nearly 20 years of Sunday afternoons spent in this exact spot. "I love you, Clara Whitestone," Caleb said. "More than I loved you yesterday, not as much as I will love you tomorrow. And I love you, Caleb Whitestone, my mountain man, my protector, my best friend, my home." As the sun set on another Sunday in Eager, they walked home hand in hand, ready to join their family for dinner. Their children and grandchildren would be waiting, and the house would be full of warmth and laughter. But first, they stopped at the small cemetery on the hill behind the church. Caleb led Clara to 2 graves marked with beautifully carved headstones, Martha Whitestone and James Whitestone. They visited these graves every Sunday, a way of honoring the family Caleb had lost while celebrating the family they had built together. "I hoped they would be happy for me," Caleb said quietly, as he always did. "They would be," Clara assured him, as she always did. "They would want you to be loved and happy, and you are both." They stood for a moment in silence, then turned and walked down the hill together. The lights of their house glowed warm in the gathering dusk. Through the windows, they could see their children and grandchildren moving about, setting the table, laughing, living. This was the life that had grown from a chance meeting in an empty church. This was the love that had bloomed from shared prayers and quiet faith. This was the family that had been built by a mountain man and a woman on the run, who had found each other at exactly the right moment. Years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and occasional sorrows, as life always does. They lost their dear friend Sarah in 1898, and Thomas followed her 2 years later. Caleb and Clara mourned them deeply, but found comfort in their faith and in each other. Their children all stayed in the eager area, building lives and families of their own. The town grew and prospered, and Caleb and Clara grew with it, always active in the community, always ready to help a neighbor in need, always faithful in their church attendance and their Sunday afternoon prayers. In 1905, on their 28th wedding anniversary, Caleb took Clara back to the church in the middle of the week. It was empty, as it had been that first day they met. "I want to renew our vows," he said, "right here where it all began." So they stood before the altar, just the two of them and God, and they repeated the promises they had made all those years ago. To love and cherish in sickness and health, for better or worse, until death parted them. "You have made me so happy," Caleb said, his voice thick with emotion. "You gave me a reason to live when I thought I had none. You gave me a family and a home and a purpose. I thank God every day for bringing you into my life." "And you saved me," Clara said, "not just from Frank Morrison, but from a life of fear and loneliness. You showed me what real love is. You gave me everything I ever dreamed of and so much more." They kissed there in the empty church, their love as strong and true as it had been on their wedding day, maybe even stronger for all the years and experiences they had shared. Time continued its steady march. They both slowed down as they entered their 60s and then 70s. Caleb no longer went trapping in the mountains, though he still loved to walk in the hills. Clara's eyesight grew poor, but she still sewed and read, using spectacles that made her eyes look comically large, which always made Caleb laugh. But they never missed a Sunday. No matter the weather, no matter how they felt, they were in church every single week. Morning service with their family, then staying behind to pray together. It was the bedrock of their lives, the one constant that had seen them through everything. In 1912, on a beautiful spring morning, they celebrated their 35th wedding anniversary with a huge party attended by the entire town. They had 8 children and grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren running around. Caleb and Clara sat in places of honor, holding hands and watching their legacy play and laugh and love. "We have done well," Caleb said quietly to Clara. "Yes," she agreed. "We have been blessed beyond measure." That night, as they lay in bed in the house Caleb had built so many years ago, Clara said, "Promise me something." "Anything," Caleb replied. "Promise me that when one of us goes, the other will keep living. Really living, not just existing. We have built such a beautiful life together, but neither of us should feel guilty about being happy if we have to go on alone." "That is a hard promise to make," Caleb said. "I know, but I need you to make it anyway. Because I could not bear the thought of you retreating back into those mountains if I go first, and I could not bear the thought of wasting whatever time I might have left if you go first. We owe it to each other and to our family to keep living fully, right to the end." "All right," Caleb said. "I promise, on one condition." "What is that?" "That you promise the same thing." Clara smiled in the darkness. "I promise." They lay together in comfortable silence, two people who had shared a lifetime and were prepared to share whatever time remained, whether it was days or decades. As it happened, they both lived well into their 80s. Caleb finally passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1920, at the age of 83. Clara held his hand as he slipped away, and though her heart broke, she kept her promise. She continued to live, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and every Sunday she still went to church. She attended the morning service, surrounded by her family. And then she stayed behind, sitting in that same pew, bowing her head in prayer. Alone now, but never lonely, because she could still feel Caleb's presence beside her. She prayed for him, wherever he was. She prayed for her family. She prayed in gratitude for the beautiful life they had built together. And she remembered that day in 1876, when she had stumbled into this church, injured and afraid, and a mountain man had sat down beside her and changed her life forever. Clara lived for 3 more years after Caleb's death, dying peacefully in the spring of 1923 at the age of 85. Her children buried her next to Caleb on the hill behind the church, with a beautiful carved headstone that matched his. The entire town turned out for the funeral, paying tribute to a woman who had touched so many lives. But the story did not end there. Their children continued the tradition of Sunday prayers in the church, and their grandchildren, and their great-grandchildren. The tradition of staying after service to pray, to be grateful, to remember where the family had come from, was passed down through the generations. The house that Caleb built still stands in Eager, lived in now by one of the great-great-grandchildren. The carvings he made, including that first little wooden bird he gave to Clara, are treasured family heirlooms. The story of how Clara and Caleb met is told and retold, a romance that began with prayer and grew into a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. In the church in Eager, there is a brass plaque on one of the pews. It reads, "In memory of Caleb and Clara Whitestone, who found love and faith in this place. May all who sit here know the same blessings." And sometimes, on Sunday afternoons when the church is empty, there are those who swear they can feel a presence in that pew. A sense of peace and love so strong it is almost tangible. Perhaps it is just imagination, or perhaps it is the echo of all those Sunday afternoons when a mountain man and the woman he loved sat side by side, holding hands and praying together. Their love story began with a desperate woman seeking sanctuary and a grieving man finding purpose. It grew through shared faith, quiet moments, and the steady building of trust. It deepened through trials and triumphs, through raising children and growing old together. And it endured beyond death, living on in the family they created and the tradition they established. Caleb and Clara Whitestone proved that love can come when you least expect it, that healing is possible even after the deepest grief, that faith and prayer can be the foundation of something beautiful. They proved that sometimes, sitting in silence beside someone can say more than 1,000 words. They proved that home is not a place but a person, and that family is built not just through blood but through commitment and love. Theirs was a Wild West love story, simple and profound, starting in an empty church and lasting through eternity. It was a story of two broken people who found each other and became whole. A story of a mountain man who learned to love again, and a woman who learned what it meant to truly be safe. And every Sunday, if you listen carefully in that old church in Eager, Arizona, you can almost hear their prayers still echoing through the sanctuary, a testament to a love that began there and never truly ended. A love that was blessed by God and built on faith, strong enough to weather any storm, gentle enough to heal any wound. They met in prayer, they loved through prayer, and they are remembered through prayer. And perhaps that is the most fitting legacy of all for Caleb and Clara Whitestone, the mountain man and the woman he saved, who saved him right back. In an empty church on a Sunday afternoon in 1876, when two lonely souls found each other and discovered they did not have to be lonely anymore. The end came for them both as peacefully as any could hope for, surrounded by love, secure in faith, and confident in the knowledge that they had lived fully and loved completely. Their story became legend in the small town of Eager, passed down through generations as an example of true love and enduring faith. The wooden bird that Caleb carved for Clara still sits in a place of honor in the family home, its edges worn smooth from being handled lovingly over the decades. The journal that Henry Walsh kept, which helped bring Frank Morrison to justice, was donated to the Arizona Historical Society, where it remains as evidence of both corruption and courage in the early days of the territory. The church where they met has been renovated several times over the years, but that special pew remains unchanged, still bearing the brass plaque in their honor. And the tradition they started continues to this day, with couples throughout the congregation staying after service to pray together, inspired by the story of Caleb and Clara. Their descendants number in the hundreds now, spread across Arizona and beyond. But many still return to Eager for family reunions, and when they do, they always visit the church and the cemetery on the hill. They touch the carved headstones that Caleb's great-grandson restored, perfect replicas of the ones Caleb himself had carved for his first wife and son. And they tell their own children the story of how their family began, with prayer and faith and love that conquered fear. In the end, Caleb and Clara Whitestone lived the life they had both dreamed of, but thought they would never have. They found love when they had given up hope. They built a family when they thought they would be alone. They created a home that lasted generations, and they did it all by staying true to their faith, to each other, and to the promise they made in that empty church so many years ago. Their love story was not one of grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It was built on quiet moments, steady commitment, and the simple act of showing up, week after week, year after year, to pray together and be together. It was a love story that proved the power of consistency, of faith, of choosing each other every single day. And so, in a small town in Arizona, in a modest church that has stood for over a century, the legacy of a mountain man and the woman who loved him lives on. Not in monuments or statues, but in the lives they touched, the family they created, and the example they set. An example of how love can heal, how faith can guide, and how two people who find each other at exactly the right moment can create something that lasts forever. Their story ended, as all stories must, with death and parting. But it also ended with a life fully lived, a love completely expressed, and a legacy that will endure for generations to come. Caleb and Clara Whitestone found each other in an empty church, and in doing so, they found everything they had ever needed. And that, truly, is the most beautiful ending of all.